you. Thank you, Treasurer Goldberg. Um, my God, thank you everyone for coming. This is actually kind of exciting. It's CFA Boston's like inaugural literacy leadership summit. And I know that is a mouthful. I think, like Andrew, you said. So maybe we usually like to call it FinLit. So we'll probably refer to it as that going forward. But just so you know, it's awesome to see everybody here. I mean, being in a group like this with a lot of our peers, our colleagues, people who are really into financial literacy advocacy, it's really impressive, and it's great to be here. I'm super excited. My name, by the way, is Mike Mullin, one of the co-chairs for CFA Boston's FinLit initiative. Um, so I'm super excited. Like I said, the summit is like a long time coming. We've been talking about doing something like this for a number of years now, and it's finally come time where we can really kind of push it forward. We've had a lot of support, along the way too. My former co-chair and really good friend Alice Avanian, over 10 years ago, I think 2013, 2014, when she was doing her term as chair of the board for CFA Boston, came up with the idea and proposed it to the board and said, hey, I'd really like to do a financial literacy group. And so we called it the Financial Literacy Initiative. And from that moment forward, it has really grown leaps and bounds. I'm sure you can all appreciate this too. Her taking like a little idea as like a little startup and just growing it, was really been impressive. I mean, so much so that it's become the largest volunteer group in all of CFA Boston. We've had over 400 volunteers, throughout the years. We've had over 120 community partners, which we like to call alliances that we've worked with. These are nonprofits, schools, or other organizations that have asked us and entrusted us to come in and do some financial literacy advocacy and work for them. So that's been very good. We do over 100 presentations annually, and we get in front of and over 1,500 attendees each and every year, and it's just been growing through the years as well. And this is like going from ranging from youth all the way to seniors. But we really couldn't have done it without the support of those alliances too. They've come to us looking for assistance and help, and without that demand there, we wouldn't really have anyone to serve. So we've been able to rely on them and their continued request and their continued demand for financial literacy support. We also couldn't have done it without a lot of our partners. We've partnered with Junior Achievement over the years, Private Industry Council, Babson College, just to name a few. We've been in the classrooms, been doing presentations with them all along the way. That's been super supportive. And also, Suzanne Norman, who's my co-chair. You'll hear from her later today. She's going to be moderating the panel as well. She has really been, pushing this forward over the past couple of years. And finally, we got, the attention and the support to actually get, have this presentation in front of you. But of course, we couldn't have done this either without the support of CFA Boston. Jeannie Wolf, who's been right behind us all the way, and all her staff. Renee Russo, the COO. Todd Fowler, Mackenzie. I'm going to forget someone. Megan, Laura. Everyone. Caitlin too. Everyone's been there and supports us in the background too. So we appreciate all your work doing that. And then our ridiculously fantastic volunteers, which I see many of you guys in the room here today, who've been there in the trenches and done a lot of presentations. Thank you. We couldn't have we wouldn't be doing this without you. You guys continue to to push us forward. So that's really good. Thank you to State Treasurer Deb Goldberg for her words today. That you can see now that that with her passion and the words that she spoke with, and what she's trying to do with her initiative of trying to put a bill forward and get into the school systems, which is some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. How very important it is, and we wouldn't be able to do that without support from from our from her and from our government. This becomes a top priority. Which leads us to today's summit. We have three very engaging panels throughout the afternoon, which are going to cover a lot of topics of financial literacy. We'll have some breaks in between, so everyone will get to take a little break, which is fine. But we understand too that we welcome and we really want some audience participation. So your comments and your questions during the Q&A sessions will be super relevant. So it should be pretty good. And then at the end of the day, we got a fun networking event. So don't forget about that, and please, I hope to see you there. Financial literacy, which is often discussed as being very knowledge based. And we got tons of content. We've got, we can talk about budgeting all day. We can talk about debt and credit. We can talk about saving for retirement, saving for school, saving for our first home, things like that too. But at the end of the day, it's so much more. It's really about affecting and impacting financial behavior and decision making. And that happens over the course of a lifetime. It's not just something that you have the knowledge to do. You really have to make that change. So, but sometimes too, we're not really wired at birth with making decisions properly. We can make the wrong decisions along the way. So having those tools and being provided those tools is super important too. Along those lines, our first panel is going to focus today on some of the ways we're trying to reach the community, and in particular the youth. In order to engage them and get them ready for their financial life ahead. We have an exciting and knowledgeable panel. With us today, we've got educators, we've got nonprofits, we've got government, we've got private institutions, all who are working hand in hand to bring education and the tools that the youth need to get better. So I hope you're going to be impressed, and I hope you're going to be captivated by the discussion. So for that, let me introduce the panel and introduce my co-monitor. My co-monitor, is Rad Nova. He's the CEO of Junior Achievement. He's got a bevy of questions. I'm sure he's going to be ready to ask the panel. So and if he is looking quite young today, just a reminder, it was his birthday recently. So,
thank you.
His second in command, his COO, Deirdre O'Connor Mitchell, is also here. Elizabeth Lavasta, who's a teacher in the Lawrence school system. Rob Powers, who's a policy manager for the Massachusetts Education, how do you say it?
Executive Office.
Executive Office of Education, thank you. And Sarah Lee, who's a municipal bond analyst for Morgan Stanley, but is also a Junior Achievement alum, Boston Latin alum, Northeastern alum. So she's here to talk about her experience and what she sees coming from that perspective. So with that, I want to pass it over to Rad to really he'd like to say some words too, and then we'll get started on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And very briefly, I just want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank the CFA Society Boston for your partnership over the years and for reaching out to us to invite us to be part of this panel with you today. We really appreciate it. We have a lot of great partners with Junior Achievement in Greater Boston, and we reached out to some of them to ask them to co-sponsor this panel with us. And I do want to say thank you to Fiduciary Trust and Sid Queller, who is here. Thank you, Sid, for your sponsorship of this panel and your support of Junior Achievement. Just a quick raise of hands. How many of you know about Junior Achievement? Have you heard of Junior Achievement before? Any alumni in the room? Anyone who did JA in high school? Or I'm looking at you, Sarah. I know you did. Okay. Great. Well, I would, very brief summary of Junior Achievement, but I would also invite all of you, even if you know us, to get to know us again, because we've evolved a ton since we were founded. So very briefly, we were founded in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I want to recognize Amy, my counterpart, who leads JA in Springfield. The original Junior Achievement was started in Massachusetts and now serves young people across the U.S. and in 100 countries globally. So right here in Massachusetts, gone global over 100 years, 110 years more or less. The Boston chapter was founded in 1950. We just celebrated our 75th anniversary last year. And we really have evolved over the years. We started as a youth entrepreneurship organization. In the 80s, we became a K-12 partner around financial literacy and entrepreneurship. And more we're doing workforce readiness and how do we get young people exposed to the workforce, ready for the workforce, and ready to lead in the future. So we certainly, right now, our focus is really to provide economic mobility and opportunity to young people across the country. And so we've certainly have evolved a lot since maybe the last time you heard of Junior Achievement, and invite you to get to know us. So thank you for having us, and I'll let you the rest of the panelists introduce themselves.
Oh, 100%. Thank you. Thank you for Rad. Deirdre, would you like to go and just tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Deirdre O'Connor Mitchell. I'm the current Chief Operations Officer of JA of Greater Boston. I've held quite a few roles in my time there. I've been with JA in Boston for 10 years and JA total almost 14. I started in the New York City office. Elizabeth?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Elizabeth Lavasta. I am a 9th grade high school teacher at the Lawrence High School, and I have been tasked with piloting a program that builds on the Lawrence High School portrait of a graduate, which builds the necessary skills for a 20th century student. So we cover 4 different areas, one of them being financial literacy, which is dear and near to my heart, social emotional learning, career development, and also digital literacy.
Good afternoon. How about now? How
There
about,
you go.
yeah, great.
Better.
I used to teach, so the teacher voice is kind of what I've always relied on. This is very different. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rob Powers. I am a policy manager at the Executive Office of Education. So I'm excited to be here on behalf of Secretaries Reich and the Healy Driscoll administration. I'm particularly excited to be here today because of the many things that we work on in the office. I get to work every single day on our statewide graduation council endeavor. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the panel. But right now, what we're doing is we're convening a wide range of stakeholders to reimagine what graduation standards should be in Massachusetts and what we believe that every student should know, understand, and be able to do when they graduate from high school in Massachusetts.
My name is Sarah. I'm here as a Junior Achievement alum, and I'm excited to share my experience as someone who's benefited from Junior Achievement's financial literacy program and mentorship. My primary involvement with Junior Achievement began when I was a student at Boston Latin School, participating primarily in the Junior Achievement Summer Institute and company programs, which I'll touch on later. I've known Brad and Deirdre now for almost 10 years, and they and JA staff have supported me through high school, college, and now my early career. I'm now working at Morgan Stanley in Muni Bond Research, where I've been for about 3 years. My goal is to continue my involvement as an alum and as a volunteer to further Junior Achievement's mission of strengthening financial literacy and supporting career readiness for youth in priority and underserved communities.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. See, great panel. Deirdre, I kind of want to start with you because I was thinking, like a lot to what Treasurer Goldberg said about there being a gap in Massachusetts in particular when it comes to financial literacy being taught in the classroom. I know Junior Achievement has been there for a long time, and we've certainly helped along the way with CFA Boston in a lot of school systems as well too. How does Junior Achievement really go about the process of identifying priority communities and identifying school systems to work with and actually getting into the school system?
Yeah. So first, you mentioned a gap, and I'd say that the gap is maybe the biggest gap is just the access and perhaps equitable access to consistent, relevant, fun, engaging financial literacy content. Young people are really eager to be financially savvy. They want this knowledge. They're asking for it. So JA works with communities. We look at economic data, both from the Department of Education or elementary and secondary education here in Massachusetts. We look at the demographic makeup of communities. We look at the geographical accessibility to corporate partners when we are looking at what communities we want to serve. But we're also looking at who's responsive and who is opening their doors to partnership with JA so that we're not constantly chasing. So those are some of the identifiers that JA of Greater Boston uses. The Brookings Institution research tells us that there's been, over the past few decades, a 45% decline in economic mobility. So we really want to put the limited resources that we do have into the communities that need us the most so that our impact can be greatest.
Great. Thank you. Do you ever get pushback from schools, like saying, no, we don't necessarily need your services?
I've never been told that. But I think it's common knowledge that schools are inundated with issues, problems, budget shortfalls, just a lot of things. And I think the pandemic brought out even more of those issues. And so I don't think that schools don't want to partner with us. I think it's a matter of how can they find time in their school day. We have been a Commonwealth teaching to a test for many, many years, and I think that has played a part in resistance. But when JA goes in and talks about the hands-on learning, the hands-on experiences, our programs often come with simulation. Curriculum is already developed for teachers. It becomes a little bit more difficult to say no, I think, for some of our communities. And the ones who really want us and want or have the same goals that JA does around equipping students with financial literacy knowledge, understanding entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial thinking, being exposed to career readiness and career exploration, that skill set, they start to find a way to get creative, and we can get creative with them to meet schools where they are. We have, I think there's 50 or so products in the JA system of programs and courses. And so typically we can find something to fit the needs of our schools. It's just a matter of conversation and time, and then working with those partners to figure out what we can do to provide for them and for their students. And that takes time, and it takes a lot of cultivation.
Great. So I'm going to go to you, Rob. And in my 10 years as leading junior achievement at Greater Boston, I have seen the most momentum around financial education across the Commonwealth. And I'm hoping that you can share with the audience what is driving that elevation of financial literacy as a potential graduation requirement that's being discussed by the council that was put together by the governor. What outcomes is the EOE, the Executive Office of Education, hoping students will have by the time they graduate? And if you can just also touch on how policy and implementation may come together over time.
Yeah, great. And if you'll all indulge me as a former history teacher, I want to start with a history lesson. So just kind of setting the table for where we're at now and that momentum that you mentioned. As many of you know, back in November of 2024, the voters of Massachusetts decided to decouple the MCAS exam from graduation requirements in Massachusetts. That is a very fair thing to say to us as policymakers, but one of the things that's a little tricky about the ballot question is it left us with a situation where there's really not much of a common thread across the states, across the state, as to what it means to get a diploma in Massachusetts. So there, other than some 10th grade coursework requirements, there's really no kind of like common menu, if you will, of things that every student, no matter where they came from, you'd know this diploma means this. So shortly thereafter, what happened is Governor Healy signed an executive order to create the statewide graduation council, 32 members, everybody at the table. So we have teachers, administrators, school committee, parents, business, college, you name it, they're there. And the goal has been to kind of sit down and say, okay, here's our compelling question, right? What should it mean to graduate from high school in Massachusetts? Did a lot of listening to start. We went on a roadshow of listening sessions across the state. We had a stakeholder survey that had almost 7,000 responses from all different types of stakeholders. That survey, I think, was probably like the first kind of flashing light for us around financial literacy, because across all of the different stakeholders that filled it out, 93% of folks said that when we asked, you know, like what subject areas should students know when they graduate, financial literacy, 93%. So we're like, okay, you know, we've always known that financial literacy is important, but what a really important signal, right? We've also been engaging in trying to design, you know, like a vision of a Massachusetts graduate. So what Elizabeth said that they're doing at the school level, we try to do that at the state level. What are those core competencies that every student should have? We've created that based on that research and feedback, and we want our students to be thinkers, contributors, and leaders. And then there's these sub-competencies, and one of those is being a responsible decision maker. And we've specifically named that we want students to be responsible decision makers around financial literacy as well, right? So then the question becomes, well, how do we actually make that a reality? Because as Deirdre talked about, right, you have all these competing mandates, interests, resources, et cetera. So what we're working on now is we put out an initial framework in December of a set of 7 recommendations that we see as a comprehensive package of what every student should do to graduate. And they fall really into 3 buckets: learning experiences and mastery. So that's the coursework. That's how we know if a student has met those standards that are contained in the coursework. But then there's also ready for what's next. And there's a series of college, career, and civic readiness recommendations. One of those recommendations was that every student should graduate from high school having received financial literacy education. What we're trying to figure out now is to really, what is the right model for that, right? Like, what would be the right way to ensure that we have the right foundations in every high school, no matter where you went, so that every student graduates with financial literacy education? That's the conversation that we're engaged in right now. And we're hearing some great ideas. We're hearing some concerns too. I need this resource or this capacity. But that's what we're trying to do, is really nail down what's the right model moving forward. But back to Rad's original question, momentum is the perfect word for it. You know, the idea that there was already this momentum building thanks to the treasurer and other advocates. And then we have this opportunity to re-envision graduation requirements. We haven't done that wholesale since really 1993 in Massachusetts. That's the momentum we have in front of us right now.
Rob, can you comment on policy becoming reality as it relates to like educator support training that would hopefully will go into place?
Absolutely. So our goal is to release our final report in June that would further articulate the roadmap to implementing these requirements. And then we would be in conversation with the legislature, with the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, and with school districts to talk about, next steps as far as any legislation required, any regulations required, and any resources required as well to implement this successfully. We're hoping that, the students who are in middle school now who are going to set foot in those high schools very soon, it's hard to imagine that, will be the first students that have this requirement and have all these supports available.
Thank you. Awesome. Elizabeth.
Yes.
Kind of piggybacking off of what Rob was talking about too, and being kind of spearheading the efforts that are going on in Lawrence and the school system there. Like what have you been doing? Or what do you see? And do you see that like the role what your students are getting, benefiting, from what you're producing? And is there any? It's nice to see that there's something in the pipeline, coming from a curriculum standpoint, from the from the policy standpoint. But what have you been doing with your efforts, and what successes have you had?
Yeah, sure. So what I have noticed in the last 4 years of me delivering these classes, these lessons, has been that everyone who has received it, one always says, I wish that we can actually get this again my junior year. Because sometimes I feel that they feel like they're too young to receive that education, and they want a reminder of all the lessons that they're receiving, particularly when we're talking about if we open up the conversation and we think about credit and we think about maybe compounding interest and things like that. Sometimes because of the community where we live in, most of our students come from homes that they're in survival mode, right? And so it limits the capacity for them to actually be able to entertain thoughts past how am I going to make it through the day. So as we cultivate the student and we help them through different practices, in our freshman seminar program, one of the biggest practices that we do is we always have a social emotional learning content objective, right? And that is essential to learning financial literacy because it makes them become more aware. It makes them become more conscious of how they regulate their behavior in order to process how do I spend money and how will I balance making money later on. So what I have noticed is that the students, number one, change their thought process about money through the lessons that we learned there. And two, they want to come back to us and receive more lessons like that, but they understand that maybe they can benefit from that when they're in junior, senior year, which is something that we're working on.
Yeah, I wanna bring Sarah into the conversation. I met Sarah when she was a shy high school student, maybe 8 years ago, and it's been amazing to see her grow into a confident professional now at Morgan Stanley. But Sarah, I hope that you can share with the audience maybe what the early lessons about money and financial literacy that you received that helped you prepare for college and career. And besides financial literacy, were there any other skills that you were exposed to that were helpful to you at Northeastern and now at Morgan Stanley?
Response is not too long-winded, but junior achievement has been an influential presence in various stages of my life to instill financial literacy skills and also to ensure my career readiness. In my kindergarten classroom in Dorchester, JA volunteers came to teach my peers and I about the value of different coins and bills. And then in high school, as a student at Boston Latin School, I rediscovered junior achievement through the company program, where my teammates and I were coached by JA volunteers to develop a product to fill a need within our communities, and then also pitch our business ventures at national and regional competitions. In high school, I also participated in the week-long JA Summer Institute program, where volunteers from Santander and Travelers Insurance delivered presentations about budgeting and financing life after high school. Volunteers hosted various sessions, and we learned about, for example, the difference between needs and wants, and also the importance of maintaining good credit. This program was incredibly impactful for me as I learned how to make responsible financial decisions and about the importance of saving from a young age, which was critical because these were when my habits surrounding money were forming. The lessons I learned from Junior Achievement and the mentors and the staff who believed in me gave me the hope and the confidence that I could achieve my dream of financing my college education on my own. And then just a little bit of background about my family. My parents grew up in Vietnam and they immigrated to the US with the American dream of being able to provide their children opportunities that they never got to have. Both of my parents work 6 days a week, my mom as a nail artist in Cohasset and my dad as a jeweler in downtown. Although they didn't have many resources, my parents invested all of their time, money, and energy to put my sister and I in Kumon classes, in tutoring during the week, Vietnamese language classes on Sunday, and as well as swim team and piano lessons. My parents, shaped by post-war hardship, understand how quickly material possessions can just disappear. My mom often said to me that she hoped to provide me with something that nobody could take away from me, and that was my education. During my senior year of high school, once again, Junior Achievement was there to support me. I remember vividly talking to Rad as he took the time out of his day to call me and help me decide where I was going to attend college. And my primary concern was making sure that I was making a selection that was financially feasible for me. Ultimately, I was so excited to attend Northeastern University, and I studied business administration with concentrations in finance and entrepreneurship, in part due to my inspiration from Junior Achievement. With Junior Achievement support, I was finally able to realize my and my parents' dreams, and I became the first in my family to graduate from college. Now I'm working at Morgan Stanley and Muni Bond Research, where I've been for about 3 years now. All in all, Junior Achievement provided me with the tools and the confidence to finance and complete my college education and also work towards a career that I feel passionate about. Because of Junior Achievement volunteers who believed in me, Rad and Deirdre, I was able to see a possibility for a brighter future that I didn't think I could reach. I'm really grateful to be able to continue my involvement as an alum now and to be with you all here today.
That's
Great
awesome.
job.
Thank you. That's a, amazing perspective, of course. And, it's one thing that, to see that we can see now that the need for financial literacy in the school systems, how important it is. And, now it's nice to see that a lot of that is being pushed forward. Elizabeth, I hope you don't mind me asking too, because I know you got an interesting background as well. I don't know if you want to share it, but if you do, that would be great. But
Yeah.
can you also talk about, maybe after that, reaching youth is is difficult. It can be very challenging at times too, to captivate their attention and to go into and to get them engaged. Maybe talk about some of the things that you do in the classroom to help along that way.
Sure. So, teaching Junior Achievement for me, the curriculum is already created and they present it to you as a teacher. So that was the easy part. But once I actually started getting into the lessons, I started actually applying it to the lessons in my own life. See, because I am a Laurentian and I am also a product of the Lawrence High School. And when I went to the Lawrence High School, I did not receive any financial literacy courses. I was never exposed to that type of conversation. I will go back and say something from what the treasurer said. She addressed how sometimes adults might be intimidated by teaching financial literacy because they themselves did not have that or that type of education. And while others might have felt embarrassed by it, I embraced it because I realized how that was going to be able to break a cycle in my own family, within myself, and for my community. Part of my other job is I do a lot of volunteer work in the community. I'm very proud of that because I was able to ascend to the levels of education where I'm at because of the support that I had in my community. My community happens to be a transient community sometimes, but I also describe it as being a community that has a lot of resilience and builds a lot of agency. So at the high school, The problem that we see, again, I will refer back to how the students come, they have to survive a lot of circumstances. And within those families and surviving certain circumstances, there's a lot of shame, right? Because I have to pick what bill I'm going to pay for that month. I have to pick what bill is going to help me survive through that climate, right? So that's true of the story of our students. So that limits the amount of conversations that maybe parent to child or maybe aunt, uncle to niece, nephew is converse, right? The dialogue within the family dynamic is limited in that way. One of the things that I do as a teacher is I push away that shame by being vulnerable with my students about um, my own lived experience, my own opportunities or lack thereof of opportunities, and I'm transparent, and through that transparency I get more engagement with the students. JA gives me the opportunity to conduct or fill gaps where the students need, like for example, the literacy rate in the city of Lawrence is a little bit lower. It's lower than its counterparts, right? But that doesn't really explain the resilience in the character that I see in my students. But JA allows me to fill in that gap because of the way the lessons are developed, because it provides the proper vocabulary so that we can have the appropriate conversation, so that we can build that engagement and produce the outcomes that we want from our students. I have really thoroughly appreciated being involved in teaching this material. And each year we get a little bit better. This year, we have what we do annually, which is called the Stock Market Challenge, which is a great time. I actually have the students follow real-time stocks as well as do the stock market simulation through that JA provides us. And this year, I had my students wear ties for 3 weeks. And
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Don't bring back the tie.
yes, you would be amazed as how much the students' engagement went up and how much their confidence got boosted as a result of just tweaking that lesson and adding on to something that was already great. So this is really transformative, and I really love that JA doesn't use any language that denotes what our capacity is, because it already calls us priority communities, and that is already a winner, because they look at us as not as a deficit, right? They look at us as an addition, as something that is beneficial to our community. So it's a great program.
Yeah. Question. No, I'll comment that I grew up in Lawrence myself, and there's a lot of great things that happen in that city that are not highlighted. And to hear what you're sharing and the partnership that we've seen from the Lawrence Public Schools and Lawrence High School in particular is really inspiring to see, because there's so many great young people in that city and many of the cities that can add value to the Commonwealth in many different ways. So thank you for all your work.
I guess the challenge then would be, how do you bring that statewide? Because it's not just the priority communities that need that financial education, which they definitely most dearly do for sure. And it's going to be hard to engage those students, first and foremost too, but also just across the whole entire Commonwealth. I don't know, Rob, you guys have probably circulated some ideas or thoughts on that. I don't know if you could maybe share.
Yeah, sure. So I think, first of all, just so inspired by what both Sarah and Elizabeth talked about in their own experiences, and that's what we want to see for every student, right? I think something that Elizabeth said is really important, which is this threading of the meeting the students where they are and seeing them who they are, and having what we call an asset-based mindset. Like, what are these students already bringing to the classroom is the first important thing, I think, for every educator. It's also this idea that, we deal with these systems challenges, even at the school level, right? Around lots of different things that you wouldn't think at first glance is like, an issue of financial literacy. For example, it's not a secret that, we've had challenges since the pandemic around chronic absenteeism. So that's students missing more than 10% of school. That has gotten much better, but we have more work to do. And one of the things the research shows is that, maybe in everybody's life, there was something that you're like, I look at this a little bit differently now that I've been through that pandemic. And for a lot of our students and families, they look at high school different. And they say, is that really worth my time? Now, I have an answer to that as an educator, right? But it's on us to really like, interrogate that and say, what does that mean? And one of the things that we're finding is that students need to see relevance in what they're learning. And Elizabeth and Sarah have really articulated the value of financial literacy as a really relevant learning experience. So the question becomes, how do you do this for everybody? And I think you think about two things. One is there's this kind of like commonality that every student, no matter where they live and what school they go to, wants to see relevance in the curriculum. They want to understand that like what I'm learning means something to me, while also recognizing that we have many school systems, many different communities that have lots of characteristics that are unique to them, and we want to honor that as well. So I think what we're trying to do right now, Mike, is trying to strike that balance with, we have a tool as the state to make sure that there's a consistent floor, right? And that we can use legislation and regulations to make sure that this doesn't fall by the wayside anymore. But then we also really, I think this is what matters more, is working as a state to listen to, like, I want to walk through Elizabeth's classroom and see what that experience looked like. What are those best practices? What are those models that are working out there? And then make sure that we can share across districts, that we can proliferate that, and that we're also supporting districts that aren't doing anything, right? Like, so it's like, oh, this is overwhelming to me because we don't even have a financial literacy elective, right? Great. Here are some resources, here are some best practices, here's some learning communities. Those are all the things that we're trying to wrestle with, but it's those two dimensions, right? Having a consistent floor expectation, really also like meeting our students and communities where they are and making sure we're lifting them up.
That's great. I want to bring Deirdre back into the conversation too, because what we're talking about kind of relates to content. Or, I said before how content really isn't the answer. It's more like the behavioral changes that you can that can happen. But the content itself is important, and I know from having done a few JA courses myself, teaching it in the classroom, it can be very engaging. We break out into small groups, talk about real life experiences, things like that too. So I didn't know if Deirdre, you could add on to some of that stuff from like the content level. What are we using to help engage students right now, which we could possibly use going forward?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a number of things. I think one thing to take away today is like we're not going to solve this financial literacy gap with just one solution. So there's a lot of things within content itself. I think it would be very helpful if the first time somebody actually did a budget was not in the real world when the stakes are pretty high. So we have students as young as middle schoolers actually create a budget based on a life situation that they are provided. In high school, they have ownership over that life situation so that they can align their career aspirations and the salary range of that career in the greater Boston area, to understand how their budget what that would actually look like. So again, we're aligning their career aspirations, making it super relevant. I'm interested, I'm invested in this. And then they actually have to create a budget for their life situation. They also get to go through milestones if they want to get married and go through having children. I have two little ones who are extremely lovely, but they're also really expensive. They have to make budget choices based on those kids, childcare. They have to eat. They have to be clothed. They get to think about retirement and what are some of those milestones. 75% of current JA alumni are homeowners in this country, and that is above the norm. So they're also getting to think about that wealth building and what are the milestones? Do I want to own a home? Do I want to retire at a certain age? And they get to do all of that in again, what I called a low stakes environment. They also get to understand design thinking and problem solving and develop competencies that are going to help them no matter what career they choose, these transferable skills that employers tell us are both lacking and critical to being successful in the workplace. They get to kind of try those things out. Elizabeth mentioned the JA Stock Market Challenge, which is a series of lessons that introduces the stock market. This is not day trading. This is not let's get rich quick. This is what does it mean to invest for the long term? How do current events impact what's happening in the stock market? So we have teachers who teach those lessons, and then they get to do an in-class simulation. The winning teams get to come to kind of a regional almost competition where we simulate the stock market, we simulate what is happening in the world. We all know a lot is happening in the world that's impacting the financial market. So the students get to make all of these high stakes decisions in a safe environment, in a fun environment, when they can actually learn and then take those experiences and those lessons and bring that to their lives as they continue on high school, college, and beyond. And so as long as we continue to redevelop, which JA is very aware that we need to stay relevant, and it's hard to do that in real time, but we try very hard to do that. We will continue to redevelop our programs to be more aligned with whatever is happening, but keeping hands-on learning experiences, simulations, and then also having exposure to people like yourselves, the volunteer and mentors. They are extremely impactful. Sarah has been impacted by many volunteers, many mentors that she's kept in touch with. Other alumni have done the same. We know that that's also an indicator of economic mobility, is that access to mentors. Opportunity is not something that's prevalent for everybody. Talent is everywhere. Talent is all over Lawrence High School. It's kind of unbelievable if you ever walk through those halls, especially in that performing arts center. So we need to give them access to networks and opportunities just as much as we need to give them access to curriculum and content that makes sense for them, that they can see themselves in, and then they can take with them after graduation.
Great. Perfect. And it kind of leads into what I was going to ask next, which was after graduation. I wanted to ask Sarah a question about what you found, particular during your high school years, I guess you would say, that really helped you. Like maybe one thing could be an activity, it could be something that you learned that helped you, in your professional career, and maybe one thing that you thought you would have liked to know earlier.
School, I think the JA company program was the most impactful for me. I'm terrible at public speaking. It really scares me. Even at work now, it's something that I'm still working on. And through the company program, we were sent to regional and national pitch competitions, and Deirdre helped to organize in my first year. And going on Washington, D.C. in front of all of these people and presenting, like, that was nerve-wracking, but that was the first time where I looked out into a crowd and I felt like maybe like I belong in these rooms as well. And like that was a beautiful thing for me. And I'm still working on that now, with that imposter syndrome, feeling like I belong in the room that I am and I deserve the opportunities that I've worked for. But junior achievement was the very first step, and the very first time I felt like I could achieve the career and the financial opportunities and life that I dreamed of and that my parents dreamed of. One thing I wish maybe I learned more about, maybe retirement planning and health insurance. I remember my first year working full time, we got the package all together. I think we had to enroll in a month or however long, and being extremely freaked out and stressed and trying to go to my parents and ask them for help of how I figure it all out. And they were like, we don't know, you have to figure it out. And so that was something that was really nerve-wracking. And for my parents, I think I'm their retirement plan. So I'm really excited that because of the opportunities that my parents worked so hard to help me have, and because of junior achievement now, I can serve as a mentor to my younger sister. She's 15 years younger than me, so she's growing up in the same house with the same problems that I ran into. But this time, I can be there to help her, and I have the skills and resources to do so. So that's.
No wonder why your parents pushed you so hard. Put you in FUMA. You're their retirement plan. That makes sense. Okay, that's really good. It's good, beneficial to hear. Rob, hearing all this and how the classrooms, what seems to be working and stuff like that too. I guess my question to you is what from a government level, policy level, what are you thinking of to support teachers? Or I mean, teachers aren't necessarily educated to teach financial literacy. So how do we go about enacting that change or giving them some assistance along the way?
Sure. Great question. And so, it's interesting because so we have a lot of the parts we need to be successful statewide already, which is really exciting, right? It's just making all the parts speak to each other and making it work together. So one of those parts is that we do have financial literacy standards in Massachusetts. What's interesting about them, though, is that they started as optional standards in the math framework, and then they got moved over to my home of history and social science, also optional. So then it became kind of like a half joking tug of war with my math colleague when I was a curriculum coordinator for social studies, say like, all right, like, so you own the elective now, right? But then it was kind of weird because it's like, well, the math teacher knows it better than I do. No, but it's got societal. All that to say is that we have a horrible siloing problem in high school in particular. I'm sure anybody who's been to high school in the last 150 years knows that. So, one of the things that we'll need to really be thinking about is like, how do we support teachers in breaking down those silos first and foremost, right? So like, where does this live in your school? Like what courses, what learning experiences? Then we need to also make sure that we're providing professional development that resonates, whether you're the social studies teacher, the math teacher, the business teacher. In a lot of schools, to Elizabeth's point, they teach it in their advisory, which means you could have the physical education teacher in that advisory as well. So knowing that we have a challenge that we want to make sure that the content itself is accessible to any type of educator, that'll really push us at the state level because we're so used to like you kind of lean into your certification area. That is something that's on our radar. We'll certainly be thinking about that as this becomes a statewide graduation requirement. And then, the other aspect of it too is that making sure that curriculum materials are available that help. We know from research that when a curriculum material is more than just a lesson plan that you kind of dust off that first time, but actually educates the educator, that's a pretty powerful tool. We've seen that with literacy in particular at the early grades. So how can we make sure that there are resources and curricula available that if I'm a teacher who's never taught this subject before, the curriculum is actually teaching me the content as I go? Kind of to Elizabeth's points earlier, right? About like we learn as adult learners as well. That'll be really crucial. So these are all the things we're thinking about. I love these things, so I try not to get out ahead of my skis because we still have to finalize a report, get it, get some laws passed, et cetera. But certainly those are areas that are ripe for supporting teachers.
No doubt. I think that resonates a lot with us at CFA Boston too. I'm sure Alice and Suzanne, you guys can, when we talk about teaching the teacher or educating the educator, like all the time, like we're, a group of financial professionals. So you think we know our stuff. But a lot of times, we might, but it's hard to deliver that, how to, give that message on to the audience and relate to the audience, whether they're teens, employees, seniors, et cetera. It's being, having that ability to be able to do that. And so we do, kind of courses like that all the time, and try to get, people engaged to do that. It's not I think it's almost like an obstacle. Once you overcome it, it becomes easier and easier and people get really good at it. So people don't know that they actually have it in them. So I think maybe, I'm hoping that at the, high school level and the middle school level too, that a lot of those teachers who are kind of intimidated by it, embrace it, just like Elizabeth said that she did.
Yeah, and super quick to that, Mike. I think, in research, teacher efficacy is one of the highest predictors of student success, right? So you're talking about building teacher efficacy. And, recently we had a bill passed into law in 2018 around civics education. It created a civics. We now have a civics course in 8th grade. We're doing civics across the grade span, but civics is one of those courses that even as a certified social studies teacher, I probably got a lot of history professional development, not so much on civics. So I think that's going to be a great model for us to say, how do we we have all these PD opportunities now paid for through a trust fund in the state that provide, like content knowledge around civics. I think that's kind of the future as well for financial literacy education is bring you all who have the content expertise in, help train those teachers, and then really get that going in the classroom.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, really talking about, we've talked about, engaging youth. We've talked about, where it's needed, but, talking about like scaling it up, at that point, how do we do that? What sort of support do we all need? Because we're all in this sort of together.
Yeah.
And we've all been doing it together, just sort of ad hoc. So, I guess, question to, Elizabeth, I might ask you this one just because it might be relevant. Like, do you use any outside besides JA and your own teaching, any other support, within the community? I know you work with Lawrence for ACT Lawrence or whatever.
So I have the privilege to work with a community development corporation called ACT Lawrence, which is a Latina-led nonprofit. that has been around since 1996, and they provide financial literacy opportunities. They provide housing, housing education, like how to buy a house, how to maintain your house, landlord education on how to run a house. They also venture into youth development. And in the youth development, what I have learned through their support is something that kind of scares me, which is the cliff effect. One of the ideas that we have to wrap our head around, we're doing all this education at the high school level, right? And in a community like Lawrence with a high poverty rate, which is documented, especially higher than the average household with its neighboring communities. When we educate the students with this financial literacy in the community development organizations, what we're trying to think about is how do we push forward those families so that they don't fall in the cliff effect. The cliff effect is pretty much where families are going from the poverty level over to medium income level. And there is an area, a gray area, where they no longer qualify for some government funded opportunities like SNAP benefits or like mass health, which greatly affect the families that are saying, hey, we're putting forth this opportunity, we're learning all these things, we're navigating all these new areas, and we want to elevate ourselves. But then we get caught in the what if, right? What if I get caught in that area where I don't make enough to survive? And what is going to catapult me into that next level? And that's where I think JA brings the conversation to the career development aspect of how we pick these careers. I think we have to focus on what Deirdre said about what careers are going to help our families survive an area like Massachusetts, like Boston. So I think if we're very careful and we concentrate on that, I think that's another area of development that we all should bring to the table is, yes, financial literacy is great and all that stuff, but are we addressing the little things like the cliff effect if we want to propel these families who live in these poverty type levels so that they won't miss that effect and go directly to maybe a medium household income, because it's really important. Good point. I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect. And Deirdre, kind of building off of that from like a collaboration standpoint, because I know that, the schools, are taught, but a lot of times it's like, we work a lot with nonprofits, besides, school systems and other agencies. And you guys are primarily in the school systems, but we've collaborated several times.
Yeah.
So in doing that, I think, it supports kind of what we're discussing about, kind of building up and making, creating it bigger and scaling things up so where we can reach more people. I guess, do you agree on that, or what are some of the things when you think about that?
Yeah, I think collaboration, much like almost anything that anybody does, no matter your job, is necessary for success. So, in order for us to be successful, we need corporate partners, both for funding, because we are a nonprofit, but we also need people to go into classrooms. We need people to act as mentors. We have an entrepreneurship after school program called the JA Company program that Sarah did. And that's a months-long intensive program that requires mentors who are going to dedicate their time and their expertise and help students as they navigate starting a business, which is what the company program is all about. And so we need that kind of support and collaboration in order for us to be successful. One, we're a very small team. We're currently 9 people at the JA of Greater Boston office. Amy has a small team in Western Mass. Jeff, who's the president in the New Bedford area, I think he has 3 people on his staff. We need other people, not just educators, but we need others to step up and support, step up and mentor, step up and teach in order for us to be successful. So collaboration is key. And once you have those partnerships aligned, then things start to fall into place and we can start to see the impact. We can start to see teachers feeling much more supported. We can see, the actual metrics that we're starting to measure, especially around economic mobility, start to rise and maybe, turn that 45% decline to start to turn that around. And students in places like Lawrence, in Chelsea, in Boston, where JA has a lot of strong partnerships, we're starting to see those students get internships in college that align to their interests, that align to what they're studying. And those internships we're starting to see are turning into their first jobs post college, and they are making a lot of money, and they're very, they've worked really hard for it, but it's through these connections and these partnerships that JA has, and then following our alumni that's allowed them to, basically get what they have worked really hard for, opening those networks and having these collaborations.
Amazing. Okay, good. Because that's kind of leads to another question I was going to ask too, which might be, we're getting close to almost a Q&A session, but I want to ask each of you, and I guess you kind of answered a little bit, so maybe I'll ask Elizabeth
Yep.
next. How do we measure success? How do you see success in the classroom?
Oh my goodness. I measure success in the classroom when I have two of my behaviorally interesting students turn around and now become my teacher assistants because they really liked the stock market challenge lesson. And I was blown away. My 7th period class, they are my darlings. They have a lot of behavioral challenges and they lack a lot of social emotional skills. And I don't give up on them because I know they are somebody's child. I know that they're children themselves who are 14, 15. I know their frontal lobes are still developing. And I know it's 7th period of a very long school day. But to my dismay, that is the class that performed the best in the stock market challenge. And so how do I measure success is I try not to judge my students. I resist the urge to say, oh my gosh, ya, yo no voy a hacer más nada. I'm not going to teach them anything else because it's the 7th period. And I instead say, no, they need this opportunity. Who am I to take this away from them? And thus, the outcome is my 2 big boys that should be playing football because they're huge were my teacher assistants, and they did well in their stock market challenge.
That's awesome. Thank you. Rob? Yeah, I want to congratulate that too. I wanted to.
Well, I
That's so
guess
perfect.
my answer would be everything she just.
From like a state level, like,
But
like how would
the
you
other
guys
thing I'd say about this is, as well, is that mandates have an important role in moving things forward, right? Like sometimes we don't do things until there's a requirement. So that's what we're thinking about and we're working on. But I just putting my educator hat on, Elizabeth could probably speak to this too, like things come and go in education, right? So you always have this kind of skeptical eye to whatever is new coming from the state, which is weird because now in the state, right? Of like, all right, but is this worth it or whatever? And I think the way I would define success is this, is if we are able to implement a graduation requirement and the necessary supports and structures, right, that we hope to implement. And we did a thought exercise and we said, like 5 years from now, after you get this up and running in your school, the requirement goes away, the mandate goes away. How would you feel about it? And if the students in the district and the school and the teachers felt like we wouldn't change a thing because we see the value and importance in doing this work, then I think we'll have been successful. It wasn't really at the end of the day about like being required to do something. It was about institutionalizing something that is just invaluable to that community.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Sarah. Since you're a byproduct kind of JA and what Deirdre was talking about, and you're your parents' their retirement plan, how would you how do you view yourself now, and how would you define success going forward?
Something that I think about a lot is that education and the foundation of these financial literacy skills that I've learned through JA is a freedom. And I think that's the greatest thing that JA has given me. And that's a freedom for my mental health, that I'm not in crippling debt, the ability to finance my college education, and the freedom to find employment in an area that I'm passionate about. At home, money was an uncomfortable and stressful topic, as Elizabeth had alluded to, and budgeting often wasn't a topic that was being addressed at home. My parents really wanted to protect me from all of the financial stress they were experiencing. So a lot of the times, money and finances, all of those conversations were pushed under the rug. And so I was really appreciative of all the lessons that I've learned from JA through the programs I participated in, and learning about like passionate teachers like Elizabeth who are willing to put in the time to make culturally sensitive and relevant lessons for students who are already experiencing a lot of stress on the financial front at home. So I think that was the greatest success I got from JA.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. I think, if we've heard from the panelists, and they've, said a lot of great things. I'm sure you guys will take a lot of that to heart, but we want to open it up to some questions or some comments from the audience. I was hoping there might be some participation. So if anyone has a thought, Aileen.
In your role and in, again, pushing for financial literacy, what's the biggest challenge for you to do your job? And from your perspective, how can one overcome this? So in your line of work, Deirdre, Elizabeth, in pushing for this program in Lawrence School, and from a policy perspective.
Well, I think if there was a mandate, my job would get a lot easier. And then maybe we'd be, my hope is that we'd be inundated with requests for using JA's curriculum. I think right now, some of the barriers are, where in the school day do we fit this? Do you have professional development for teachers is a question that is asked frequently. And we definitely support teachers with the content and access to the content. But that is something, professional development for teachers is something that JA needs to work on, and is something we are working on. So that I'd say is a barrier. And then, there's a little less turnover at the school level, but the amount of superintendents of school districts that Rad and I have seen in some of the communities we work with, I don't always know how things actually get done, because it happens so frequently. And there are some really hardworking, very intelligent, very passionate individuals who work in all of the school districts in Massachusetts, especially the ones that we work with. But, when there's change in leadership, there are change in priorities, there are changes to staffing. We've also seen budget cuts across the way, so that has also had an impact. So those are some of the barriers that definitely come into play when we're trying to figure out how to partner with schools, and really offering our free, by the way, JA doesn't charge schools anything, so that barrier is completely removed. But those are some of the challenges I see in our day-to-day.
So some of the challenges that I see is, as an educator, I need to tap into what is really going on in front of me. Like, we want to make sure that we are educating our students in a culturally responsive way. And it's a practice that we often try to implement in the Lawrence High. We're very intentional there. In fact, our mission is a restorative justice school system. So that allows me to automatically just hone in and use those skills into our everyday lesson and how I deliver them. If I have to take a look at what my community members do, our community is formed of a lot of hard workers, right? They know how to work very strong with their bodies. They're very disciplined about the way that they want to care for their family members. but they don't know how to work smarter. So we want to shift that mindset into working smarter and less harder on their bodies. And I think that that's where JA helps with their education, because it helps shift the mindset. And it also helps one of the practices that I use with my students is I ask the students to go home and now share this material with their parents. And I often help them find their own power to become the agency in their family so that they can break those cycles and recreate new ones. But it's a language thing. It's making sure I'm using the proper words. It's making sure that I share that vulnerability with them, and it's making sure that I remind them that they have power in themselves to do those changes.
I think the biggest challenge we face is this idea that, you know, we have to be very sensitive to the idea that we're always adding, as far as like requirements in this subject. And so I think if it were as easy as just waving a wand and saying like, all right, everybody do a full year course of financial literacy, or, you know, do it every grade level, like we'd be doing it, right? But I think the challenge we hear a lot is like, please don't add another thing to our plate. We have so many things we have to accomplish, and there's so many challenges in schools, and that's a very real piece of feedback. So what we're trying to think about is how can we do this in a way that we're not, that it's not zero sum either, that, okay, great, we add the financial literacy, so we're going to pull this subject or this requirement away, which probably also has some important value, right? So rather, what we're trying to really think about is like, how can these things be threaded? How can we find those efficiencies, at least from kind of like a scope and sequence level, or what's required of districts? And, you know, so that's what we're working on from a policy perspective. I would say putting kind of my teacher and administrator hat on, I think a challenge related to that is we often think like, I would be guilty of this, that paralysis of like, oh, like, sorry, we can't do that course, but it doesn't mean that we can't do something, right? So I think the opportunity there is, you know, reach out maybe to your local school district, to your school, and say like, hey, could we help in some way? Could we help get a credit for life fair running up off the ground? Those are these awesome experiences that I know JA students participate in. It's funded by the Economic Empowerment Trust Fund, but it's something that you could do that is not necessarily like bringing a course in to start. So just always trying to be mindful that we're trying to make it all talk to each other. Last thing I'd say there is we're trying to be very aware of this idea that, you know, like financial literacy doesn't live in a vacuum, because it's kind of like real life education. So how can we thread financial literacy with this desire to make sure that every student is engaged in college and career planning as part of our recommendation? So one of our recommendations in the report is that we want every student to graduate not just with, you know, the courses that they've taken, but with a durable plan of where they're going next and what it takes to go there, whether it's into a career or into college. So obviously financial literacy is a good match for that. And I know JA has done a lot of work of like saying that like, when you're thinking about your future, here's the financial implications of that future. So those are ways that we could kind of like not just be adding to the plate, but getting really efficient with the way that we interweave.
5 minutes. We're going to take one more question.
Yes.
Thank you. Rob, just to follow up on that, is there a conversation about weaving the curriculum K through 12 in all different coursework? So you could have it in an English class, or in a storytelling concept, or in math and science. So there isn't so much pressure on that one course or one subject matter expert. It can be incorporated all the way through.
That's exactly what we're trying to really think about. And I think that's really going to be the future of a lot of what we're recommending, because we want to break some silos down the best we can. But I would also say, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, as a former social studies coordinator, that like, so I taught high school, and then I was in charge of K-12, and my favorite grade to work with was kindergarten teachers, because the kindergarten social studies standards are so cool. And one of there's economics in kindergarten. I'm like, what are we doing in economics? It's needs and wants, right? And, you know, and then it scaffolds to first grade, and it's spending and saving. And so that's already there, right? And that's probably like the best proof of concept is I'm a teacher who teaches every single subject to these kindergartners. And one of the things I do is I show them what needs and wants are and how they relate to their life, right? So I think we can leverage some existing opportunities in our curriculum frameworks in the different subject areas, and take that next step to really say like, how can we further integrate financial literacy education, particularly at the high school level?